right, welcome everyone. Jill Gretsch, President Gretsch is out tonight, so I will be running the meeting. So welcome, time is 6:30. I'd like to call a District 204 Committee of a Whole meeting with action to order.
Yeah.
Sorry?
No action.
No action, sorry about that. Marilyn, can you please call the roll?
Member Alvarez?
Present.
Member Beat Daniels?
Present.
Member Dillon?
Here.
Member Gretsch is not here. Member Nava?
Here.
Member Strewing?
Here.
Member Thomas?
Here.
I ask all to rise and participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our next item is public participation. Marilyn, do we have anyone signed up for tonight's first public comment session?
No.
Okay, we have one item for student service this evening, and that first reading of the student handbook and code of conduct review. Leslie Owens, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Vice President Alborz. I'm going to go through, I know there's a memo for the Parent-Teacher Advisory Behavioral Interventions Committee and then a separate memo for the Student Handbook Code of Conduct update. I'm going to quickly go through our committee, just an update from our final meeting of the year, and then I'll get into the Student Handbook and more specifically into the Code of Conduct. But our Parent-Teacher Advisory Behavioral Intervention Board Committee, there we go, met on 3 occasions during the 2023-24 school year. We've provided updates after our meetings at the board table with a focus on revising our code of conduct for the year. We were assisted in this endeavor by our attorneys Michelle Todd and Valerie Robert, who are here tonight from Hodges and Louisi, in order to ensure alignment with applicable laws and board policy. Not only did they attend our committee meetings, but also in between those meetings, myself, Dr. Tyrell, Mr. Grunke, and Mr. Geddes met with them to review the suggested edits and ensure that implementation and the practical concerns were addressed too. Excuse me. On May 14th, we had our final meeting where the nearly final draft was presented to our entire committee. The committee discussed the outstanding items, which included the daily attendance requirements that we placed in the Code of Conduct, the restorative opportunities for code violations and progressive discipline, use of the speak up line for reporting, and then voluntary admission of infractions by students. I, along with a few other committee members, will provide more information, like I said, regarding the updated Code of Conduct as part of the student handbook update in just a minute. Finally, as a group, next year we agreed to focus the majority of our work on student attendance, specifically chronic absenteeism, and how, as a district, we can potentially update attendance practices and appropriately support those who are demonstrating concerning attendance patterns, and provide some more information and communication to our students and families about the impact of absences on school success. So that was the update for the committee. We'll get the committee rolling again next year. I think we'll plan for 4 meetings, and if we need to meet more, we certainly will, depending on the topic. There are a few other topics that we cover through this this committee. Our restraint and timeout policy and practices for the district is an example of that, and a few other things. So that will be part of our agenda for next year. Any questions about the PTABIC committee wrap up, or am I good to move into the Code of Conduct and Student Handbook?
I just have a question.
Sure.
So with the students who are referred to like the restorative practices room, like for whatever infraction that occurs, is that information then still reported to the state in the state behavioral report or discipline report that we have to submit every year?
The state report, it would depend how they're referred. If it's an in-school suspension, we do report on in schools if students are out of their classrooms, unless we're providing their educational services. So it would kind of depend on how and why they're referred and what length of time they're spending in that room. The discipline report that we provide on the website that we update each year is for exclusionary discipline specifically, so looking at expulsions and out-of-school suspensions. In school would count again if students are out of their classroom for the majority of the day.
So it would be a part of that report if they were referred to the restorative practice?
If they were spending, and correct me if I'm wrong, either Michelle or Jen, if your understanding is different, if they were spending a majority of the time, if it was an in-school suspension where they are not receiving academic services, then it would count. We are hopeful that our room is going to be able to provide not only academic supports, but opportunities to engage in class, and so therefore they wouldn't be missing school technically. So those wouldn't count on that report.
Is it the disproportionate out-of-school suspension report that you're referring to? Because
Yes.
if that's the case, they would not then be if they were in the restorative practice
intervention,
program, they would
right.
not then be reported in that report, is that right?
We're looking at our out-of-school suspension
Right,
days.
unless
but
they were not receiving services. If a student is somewhere in the building but not receiving any educational services, that for all intents and purposes still counts as a suspension. We're trying to reduce that or limit that.
By providing them the support so that they don't show on that report, because they're getting support.
Okay.
Did that clarify that, Michael?
Yeah, so now, yeah, I understand.
Okay. Any other questions?
How often, Leslie, did you guys meet? Was it monthly or?
We kind of, we weren't sure. This was the first year that we ran the committee, so we met 3 times this past year. Next year, we've slotted in what we think will be a quarterly meeting
Okay.
for the committee. And again, we are somewhat flexible if the committee needs to come back together. We were only going to meet twice actually this past year. Not sure the frequency. We started in November, and then we added another meeting at the end, in addition to the meetings that happened in between with some of the administration.
And will the people who are in the current committee, will they be coming back again the next year? Is that the intent, or will you be doing different people?
Yeah, we're going to invite the people who have been participating are going to be invited back, and then we're also looking for kind of referrals for, especially for our parents and our community members, for people who may want to participate and are able to do so. We met early mornings. That's tough, I know, for quite a few, but it seemed to work best for everyone's schedule. So we'll be looking to see if we can keep a good balance of community members, parents, staff, and administrators.
Great, thanks.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Anyone else? Being on the committee, I can tell you, I found it very helpful. I was especially impressed with our parent participation. They brought a lot of good questions. We had some good dialogue and debate. I think the advice from our council was very helpful as well as Dr. Rowe's insight and Dr. Owens' insight. So, I mean, I thought it was a very well use of time and energy to really come up with a plan that works for LT. So I was very appreciative of everybody that was on that committee and what they brought to it.
Thank you. Thank you for your participation as well. All right, if that's good, I'll move on to giving more information about code of conduct revision that we did as part of the student handbook update. So last school year, the student handbook committee, which has largely turned into our PTA BIC committee, completed a full revision of our student handbook that was approved by the board. Part of that work included centralizing the updates to our student handbook through my office moving forward, so that consistency and updates, both technical and editorial, was improved, and to ensure that input, especially on significant changes like the code of conduct, can be gathered from a heterogeneous group that is made up of, again, staff, community members, parents, and administrators. Policy updates, where appropriate, have been included in the handbook that you have in your board packet, and minor changes can be found throughout the attached handbook, including a new statement that was added regarding the use of AI or generative AI within the academic dishonesty portion of our student discipline section. Restorative practices and the use of restorative discipline were also added to that section, with more detail to come as we launch this new handbook anticipated in August. Our assessment and research section was updated based on the information available as of last Wednesday. We know that with the switch to the ACT as a state accountability assessment, that we will likely be updating the section a few more times to include all of the test offerings and dates, and to make sure that all of that is included. So as mentioned, the revision of the Code of Conduct was the most substantive change from last year's handbook to this version, and was the work of the PTA BIC Board Committee. The members are listed in the board packet, and I just want to thank everyone for their early morning time and their genuine interest in producing a Code of Conduct that better reflects our philosophies, goals, and practices in District 204. We worked through each section keeping the following in mind. We wanted to make sure that our Code of Conduct reflects our belief and the evidence-based approach that student participation in athletics and activities is linked to known academic benefits that stem from increased belonging, connectivity, engagement, and the other myriad pro-social benefits of being part of teams and clubs. This aligns with Goal 1 and 2 of our strategic plan as well. Additionally, we acknowledge the developmental stages of adolescence and understood that it's expected that teenagers will make mistakes. We continue to maintain the highest expectations for safety and appropriate conduct at all times, while also supporting students to take increased accountability should they commit an infraction, with opportunities to learn from those mistakes and repair any harm that may result. Again, this aligns with our desire to build a restorative community at LT, and one that is grounded in equity. Before highlighting some of the specific changes, I wanted to introduce one of our members, Carol Ann Smith. Carol Ann is the parent of Graham, a 2023 grad, Gwen, a soon-to-be junior at LT, and Grant, a soon-to-be freshman. I think I got everybody right. Graham and Gwen have participated in athletics and activities at LT, and Carol Ann is going to share a little bit about her experience on the committee as a parent. You can come on up, sure.
Thank you, Leslie. I know that you've put a lot of time and expertise into it, so thank you for leading us. I was happy to be a part of this committee, so thank you for thinking of me, just because my husband and I do have a vested interest in this district, and specifically, our children have been involved in athletics and will continue to be involved in athletics, just as you mentioned. This was really, I felt, an important work. The updates were thoughtful, and I think most importantly, student focused. There was a lot of discussion amongst the committee about what's best for students, and back and forth in what's going to be the best opportunity for restorative options for students if there is a problem or concern. And that was very important to me because, as you mentioned earlier, young people are going to make mistakes, and to toe the line so strictly that they can't recover from that and receive the benefits of the athletics and activities is against, I think, what we're all trying to do. It was a very detailed process. I really appreciated the expertise also of Michelle Todd and Valerie Robert. It was just very, very impressed of the work that they did and the expertise that they were able to bring to the committee. Every morning that I came, I was like, wow, they know their stuff. I mean, it was a lot, so thank you. Again, just to reiterate what I've already said, is this is very important work. Eventually, if a student is having some issues and needs to really dig into the code of conduct with the student and family, we did also discuss that we have rules in place, but sometimes a student, there are individual nuances, and I think we allowed for that as well within the policy, which I think is very important, because not every situation and not every student is the same. I think it was important. We had a lot of outside voices as well as the board, and that was also a strength of the group that gathered. So thank you for having me a part of it. I think the work is very good, and it will speak for itself as hopefully we don't have to dig deep into a lot of it, but when we do, I feel like the foundation has been there. So thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much,
Carolyn.
Carolyn. I appreciate it. We have a few other members that are here tonight as well. Dr. Rowe was part of our committee, Dr. Tyrell, Mr. Gaddis, Mr. Grunke. Any other additional insights, comments, anything anyone wants to add about the experience? Not to put anybody on the spot. All right. I'm going to go through just a couple of the significant changes that the committee discussed. Obviously, you have the updated code in your packet, but some of the things that we changed and agreed upon, one was specifying that students must be in school for 4 periods or more in a school day in order to attend practices, games, events, and performances or meetings. That was something we talked about a lot, and we feel like that is, a really again, kind of centers our work in that being here, being in school, being present for class is really important. We don't want you to not be able to participate, but there's a balance to that. Certainly, we know that some students have different types of schedules or may have extenuating circumstances. We talked about everything from what if someone has to go to a funeral and can't get back. Certainly, there would be exceptions that could be made, but again, putting that focus on attendance is really important, and being here before you can do the extras is really important. The application of the code across prohibited conduct was changed so that it's uniform. There had been different applications in terms of violations with alcohol, tobacco, and illegal substances versus other conduct categories. And then clarification of discipline consequences, first, second, third offenses, addition of a probationary period prior to progressive discipline, as well as a clarification of the appeals process. So those were some of the major changes. And much discussion, like as everyone has shared, was had on these points and other points. And really the prevailing takeaway, I think, from everyone was how difficult the work is to draft a code and implement a code when you begin to pull real life scenarios and think, well, how would that work in this situation, or what about this? So it was great to have, again, all the voices and have different people at the table that could contribute. So I certainly am happy to answer any questions. I know that Michelle and Valerie are happy to answer any questions, and I will also offer up my colleagues who are part of the committee to answer any questions, should there be any.
All right, does anybody have any questions or comments about the code of conduct?
And my only, I mean, not only, but one of my comments would just be that it's so, I really appreciate the time that parents put into being a part of this group, but also that it's evident, I'm doing kind of a little comparison of where we were before and how we ended up here, and that I appreciate that you guys were really taking that time to put in that but what if scenarios, because that's really so important. And the way it was written before was probably like, okay, like this is good, but it probably left a lot of room for interpretation or not interpretation, and not maybe as flexible or as nimble as it maybe needed to be for the types of situations that we're dealing with such a large student body and coming from different backgrounds. So really, really appreciate that thoughtful and hard look at it, because I know that you guys are experiencing those things all the time, and now it's like being able to take the time and put it down onto paper is just really, really helpful. So thank you guys for doing that.
I would second that. I mean, just having done some of this, seeing it change. And I do just think it's so important for us to look at this and for everybody that it can be amended throughout the year. So really just, I mean, as you said, like you can't come up with scenarios. I mean, you could go through this and have 100 scenarios, but just really to be able to update it, to see, and just to know that it can be flexible, I think is really key so that we can have the best policy we can have. But with that being said, is there an alert that it's been updated for people to see that? Because if you have read it once, you're not going there all the time. Like it's, what I mean, how do we notify people, and how is that covered for us?
We kind of put that caveat on the whole entire student handbook that things may change, and that could be things truly as simply as like the assessment and research section and a test date changing. I don't see us ever making a substantive change to the code of conduct or any other portion of the student handbook that wouldn't be brought to the board's attention and the whole school community attention.
Okay, that's what I just.
Yeah, we would never change something that would change application of discipline or.
I mean, that's kind of what I'm looking at to see. I mean, you could have one thing happen and then just be looking at an older version, and then that could get us into a heap of trouble to say, just having it be messy, if you will.
I think Michelle and Valerie helped us a lot in those situations in terms of writing the language into the code that allows us to use exercise administrative oversight and say, this is how this should be applied in this situation because of these things, and really guiding us through that. And so
You're not bound by anything. That's just my worry, that.
Bound so that we can be consistent, but not so that we would be blind to particulars of a situation. I don't know if there's anything you would
No, I
add.
think you summed it up perfectly. I mean, there's always going to be mitigating factors. There's always going to be nuances to situations. So we wanted the code to have that flexibility based on each individual student on a case-by-case basis. And this document provides that to you, but as Leslie said, we still want a consistent application of the code as well. So there is, equity there and how we're balancing consequences, providing restorative measures, et cetera.
I think for us too, obviously with the new code, the implementation and application piece is the unknown. We haven't worked with this code yet, so I know we talked with John and Peter and Jen to say, okay, we're going to have to take some time throughout next year to say, how are things going? Is the application the way we would hope? Is it smooth? Is it consistent? Are we running into snags? That might be a time where we would say we need to tweak something because it's not. In practice, it's not working the way it is in theory.
Like in practice, when you go to do it, and you're like, I don't know if there's enough guidance or there's too much, like restriction on me.
Sure.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Not me, obviously, but
Yeah.
but there's too much restriction there that, I like that it would be able to be changed, but you're saying anything substantive you would bring it back here so that the community
Yeah.
would have.
Yes, and
knowledge of it.
part of putting out a new code of conduct, and we've talked about this, quite a bit is the sort of the training part of that then for our coaches, our sponsors, our athletes, our students who are involved, the families, because we're not just gonna, stick a code in the back of the handbook and hope that everyone reads it. They have to sign off, but I don't know that everyone's like highlighting and tabbing it. So we want to make sure that we have proper training in place, and so students and families and our staff are all well aware of what's in there, what it means, and how that's going to be applied. So if we were to change anything, we would want that to be reflected in any kind of training that we provide to our athletes and our students involved in activities.
We also have the PTA-VIC committee that could look at, so as things come up,
Absolutely.
that's a group, that's the whole purpose of the group, is to look at that.
I have just one quick question. Is there anything either in this code, or maybe Mr. Grunke can address this, if there's anything that we have, you mentioned doing training for staff and coaches and stuff, which is really great. Do we have anything in place that, I'm not sure I'm picking my words right, but I think you'll know where I'm going with this, that would hold our coaches accountable in a situation where they're made aware and there has to be some follow-through in terms of the code of conduct. And I mean, I don't want anybody to feel like they're being watched 24/7, but the reality is we've got a pretty active community, right? So I'm just kind of curious if we have anything in place
In
that's a
terms of
part
like
this.
the coaches implementing the code and applying it
Right,
within there.
right?
I think that speaks to the training piece, the communication, and then again, the follow-up that either coaches or sponsors or advisors that Peter would work with have. I don't know if there's anything additional in terms of.
We get violations from a bunch of different ways. Most of the time it comes from the school, and then we just kind of get that information to the coaches and make sure that the students do what they need to do, whether it's sitting out or whatever the consequences are.
Okay, got it.
Sometimes we do have information that gets to a coach, and then they bring it to us. And so we've already worked with the coach to make sure that if you're not handling this on your own, this is a bigger issue, so.
Okay, so they have that pipeline available,
Absolutely,
obviously,
yes.
and they're aware of that, right?
And as soon as I get it or they get it, we get it right to the assistant principals. They do the investigation and determine, is this a code of conduct or is it not? And then we go from there.
Wonderful. Got it, thank you.
Well, I mean, I don't know if this was said in there, I didn't see it. But like if a student who is like, who misses or who doesn't have the 4 or more periods, like is there like student athlete and goes to a practice or something, like, is there a notification that goes to the coach?
We're working on that. Jen, do you have,
Yeah.
you might have more of the latest and greatest on that?
Yeah, we have a small team. John, Drew Reed, our division chair for student services, and our health office are all kind of working on reporting function that would make that information available to coaches and sponsors so that they have it in advance of when that practice or that meeting would start at the end of the day. So we're working on those systems so that coaches and sponsors are aware of who's eligible and not based on attendance. That's a really important piece of it, right? If we're gonna have that in our handbook, we have to have the
Doesn't get
system
enforced.
to be able to communicate to the people that are working directly with our kids. So we haven't talked about the parent and student notification of that, but we'll be talking about that as the summer progresses so that we can have a clear system to present to our coaches and sponsors when the year starts and we meet with all of them at the beginning of the year.
Thank you.
I've got a couple, but does anybody else have questions? So again, being part of that process was very insightful for me. I think we had a lot of really good discussions about looking at this from the restorative lens, and I think we just had a lot of really good conversations about, we'll hear in the community, at least I will sometimes, that we just need to hammer kids, and one strike, you're out. We're not really giving kids an opportunity to mess up again. And I think the enlightening part of the conversation was our kids are still developing their prefrontal cortex, right? Like, they are going to make mistakes. We have to let our kids make mistakes so that they can learn from it. And I think the idea of this second offense option of probation, I think that the discussion about you know, what do we do when they do that more than once? And I think what was really helpful for me was hearing from John talking about how we very rarely have that happen to begin with. A lot of our kids make a big mistake, and they learn from it so that they can continue doing the things that make them excited to come to school. And I think that's a big part of our belonging that we're really trying to make, is that we want our kids to feel invested in their school, and this is a way to do that. So I guess I was just more of a comment that I felt like the conversations that we had were really important for our making sure we're coming up with an end product that not only holds kids accountable, gets them the help and support that they need, because we all know our kids I made a million mistakes growing up, right? We all do. And it's through those mistakes that we really get to the point of not making those same mistakes again. So I just guess wanted to highlight that concept of the restorative lens that we really took a lot of time developing and talking through to make sure that, like I said, that end product was worthy of something that is for our LT students. So just want to add that. Any other comments? Code of conduct?
Or student handbook in general?
We want to go overarching handbook, because I do have some handbook
Sure.
questions. But
If code of conduct is,
I guess my only question that I have, thank you, of course, everything looks great. I'm just curious, and it's probably addressed somewhere, and I missed it, but is there somewhere for students or anyone that needs to that wants to express a concern to do it anonymously?
we offer our Speak Up line as an anonymous reporting measure, which can be a phone or an email. So students can make reports via the Speak Up line at any time.
So the confidentiality and everything's pretty much covered?
Yep.
and
Mm-hmm.
Identity and all of that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good, thank you.
Of course.
I believe that's been actually a state law. The schools have to have that mechanism, and we've had that in place probably
For a long
since
time, right?
2007 or 8 maybe. Is it, John, Peter, you guys know? It's been a while.
2007.
Yep.
So you guys didn't really modify that, or, it's been working pretty good, so.
It's been working well. Dr. Tyrell, how many reports would you say on average we get? I'm going to put you on the spot. Adam has answered this question for me, and I always lose the number. I think it's...
There was a point when I would get this question as principal, and I would always say we get about 1 per week
Okay.
throughout a year. Some week you get 2, some week you
But on
get
average?
0, but throughout a year you get about 1 per week. Maybe that's elevated over the last couple of years.
Probably slightly,
Yep,
right?
yep,
Probably
yep.
2 to 3, but
Yep.
right around there.
And how does that compare to the other complaints? Like, I'm just curious about the proportionality of who uses the Speak Up versus just coming up.
I think that's hard to tell, right? I think that some of our students feel very comfortable, like, making a report directly to a trusted adult within our system. Some feel comfortable using that tool, so it's hard, it's really hard to tell. But we have, right, the hope is that you have many different mechanisms for students to be able to share and say something when something isn't right. And so, sometimes that's a trusted adult, sometimes that's a Speak Up line, sometimes that's, another system as well.
Thank you.
I have a couple while you guys are thinking. Page 15, I had a question. Page 15 on the handbook. And I know you addressed mental health days off later on in there, but should that be one of it says, Illinois School Code considers valid cause excuse for student absence B. Should mental health days off be listed as one of those?
That was one of the questions I had too.
It does say valid cause, illness, including mental health.
Okay.
For number 1, I would say it's covered in there.
That's covered there, okay. And then on page 16, we have vacation counts towards parent guardian excused totals. Is vacation considered an excused?
If parents notify
They
in
do,
advance,
okay.
then
It is excused?
Mm-hmm.
as long as it's within their first 7.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay, I just didn't know. and this is really minor, but page 27, where it has school resource officer, within the description it has SRO. I don't know if that's if it's a SOPA issue or something where we should put the acronym for SRO after school resource officer.
Sure.
I don't know if there's other places within
It's
that.
easy to do,
Yeah, I
I
don't
think
know.
that's a good,
That-
Yeah.
maybe, could there be, like, thinking, I mean, I don't even want to say it, like a glossary of terms? Like some of them, I mean, I'm sorry, that was a bad suggestion.
If there's an acronym,
No, I don't
if there's
think
a,
so.
yeah.
Year after refer
Or
to
the
footnotes,
terms,
or
yeah.
I don't know, I'm just saying because maybe there's terms like,
Yeah.
we know what they are,
Right.
but like,
That was kind of my point, like if there's other places in
I don't
here
wanna
we're
make more work,
using
so I'm sorry I said
acronyms,
that,
if
but-
we can just make
Well,
sure
I think
that
like
it's
the
spelled
paragraph
out.
above that, it says student support team, and it says SST.
Right.
So like that
That would
heading,
be-
school resource officer,
Yeah.
if we just put SRO, that should clarify.
or maybe like, and then like in parentheses, the first time it's referenced.
Right. Use that parenthesis.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know, because I just would worry then, like, I didn't even think about that as reading
Oh,
through
I'm
it.
so sorry.
Yeah, I think that paragraph above that is a good
Yeah.
We can clarify
model.
that.
Right, good model.
Okay.
And we can certainly consider a glossary or frequently used terms that might not be as obvious to community members, parents,
And that
students
can
as
be
they are to
evolving.
us.
Right, you're trying to say like,
30-page document.
I don't know, I'm sorry, that was not.
I think that's a good idea, though, because when you spell it out in parentheses for the first time, it's such a long document that people could be like, I saw it, but it's like, and, you know, to have to do a search, I think a glossary or something, you know, if it's not too much work, it would be a good idea. I think it's pretty useful.
Suggestion. Yeah, I can start looking at that and see what would
Something
make
like
sense
that,
again,
yeah.
not
The
to
jargon.
increase it by 20 more pages, but are there
Right.
some things, or even at the head of each section, are there some few terms like for that section that would maybe?
Well, that might be better than a glossary, to
Yes.
put it in that section, because you might not know to go to the end.
Right.
Just, you know, I don't
If you're
know.
about to read about this, here's the things that
Yeah.
you need to know in order to understand. Sure.
Because I mean,
It's even better, yeah.
I mean, I'd love someone to go through that and highlight it that hasn't been on the committee and done all of the work, because I feel like we take so much for granted as what knowledge we have. You know, like,
Mhm.
what word do you not know as you go through this?
Because we're all our own worst enemies because we use that language when you get really
Right, because I was
comfortable
like,
with
I
it,
was
you
like, I
don't
just
think
pulled up a
about it.
section and I'm like, well, I kind of know all of that, but, or you do a hyperlink to
I'm
it.
laughing because I'm thinking I'll just hand it to my husband. Who's not in education field. Say, here's your project. Highlight all the things you don't understand because you don't work in
I
this
mean,
world,
that's
and I'll
exactly
start.
what it is, like, just somebody that's, you know,
Yeah.
like, what would I need explained to me? I mean, for like example, you know, like an IEP's in here, I'm just looking on page 11 or 15, I don't know which one it is, but 11 on the lower right. You know what I mean, in a 504, like, we know that. But
Right.
Yeah.
I'd be like, does my kid have a 504? And you're like, you wouldn't know it unless you knew it.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe that would be.
And it's
That's
a
good
good
to-
thing to
we can add
educate
that.
people even who don't maybe need that, but just so they understand, you know, what that language means and what those services are that they provide, and, you know, it's really helpful.
Right. I mean, and like, it just, I mean, then, because I really came to the non-discrimination on page 12, because I felt like there was a lot there, but then I looked at that and I was like, you would just need like a book for that, so I just moved on. So I was like, that's not great. But, different things like that.
I have a question on page 15 for emergency school closing. So it looks like it covers pretty much all the bases for notification. There's the text, the email, and the social media. Is there any reason why we can't put something on the school website online? Is that just too much clutter, too much work? Can the
Like on the homepage, like the
yeah
splash page.
yeah.
We do.
I think we do,
We use
yeah.
that.
Oh, so you
yeah.
And we
guys just
can-
don't
We just
spell
did-
it
yeah,
out in
it's
there,
not listed
but
there,
not,
but-
okay. Ah,
I think it is at the bottom, though. If you do not receive a phone message, email, or text, or
Posted
find
to the
emergency.
district,
listed
on the website, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hello. Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, it is there. Okay. I
Listed
didn't
on the
see that either.
website.
Okay.
All right, cool.
Sorry, I have more questions. Page 28 on the handbook talks about the ALOP program, again, another acronym, but you guys put it in parentheses there, so I appreciate that.
Maybe it's not so hard as we thought it was gonna be.
So I know in Will County, we have a similar program but we have the RSSP one, which is for students that are on expulsion warning. We have ALOP for students who are credit deficient and having trouble coming to school. And then we have a program called TAP, which is for truancy. I noticed on the website on West 40 that they didn't have that same TAP program for truancy. Do we know if ALOP, so I guess that's more of a broad question. Are we using that program as a district recommendation for students? And if so, what would be the reason we'd make those recommendations?
We typically, students who are experiencing truancy or having some difficulties in school for myriad reasons, we work with West 40, and we have student advocates who are here at LT. They're employees of West 40, but they come here and have a caseload of students. So they are really the connection for supporting students. It's very similar to a RAP services. So they're working with the families, they're working with the students, they're helping here with some credit recovery pieces, catching up on work. West 40 has a truancy person that works with our student support teams and with the Tapestry student advocates. So much more frequently here, we have people that are in the building working with our students rather than students going to the alternative education program at West 40. Sometimes that happens, but it's much less frequent that students are actually going to an alternative placement for those needs.
Okay. And so if they do go to the alternative program, is there an ALOP specific alternative program, or is it just their regional safe school?
Regional safe school.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Page 32, just a small typo. The number 2 should be number 1 under suicide depression awareness prevention program.
Gotcha, yep.
And then I think that's it for me for right now, at least.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the handbook?
Oh, sorry, I missed one. Interpretation services on page 38. It talks about that very specifically for students with IEPs, but I would assume that that's also available for others as well.
Yes, I thought it was. We can
Did I
probably
miss that
clarify
somewhere
that.
else?
On page 36, we talk about accommodating individuals with disabilities, meaning in our district, or 40, sorry. And then we have the interpretation services, but certainly interpretation services are available for anyone who needs them for any reason. So we can certainly clarify that in terms of just people coming into the district, not necessarily a parent for a meeting for an IEP meeting.
Okay. I'm sorry, I thought I was done. I'm not.
No, please, because I'm the same way, like, sometimes you see something that jumps
It's a
out
lot.
at you later.
I know, it is a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah.
Do you want to stop on that one?
Well, I was just gonna say, in going with our thing, because IEP was earlier, and then here it was defined out,
Mhm.
maybe that's just a better way to do it. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Because on page 38 of the handbook, at the top, it's individualized education program, parents IEP, and so there's not that consistency. So maybe that's just a better way to have it spelled out within that paragraph. Like, I think you're fine within that paragraph to have IEP on the third sentence, but just maybe that, instead of a glossary,
Sure, clarifying in those sections with the.
that might be just,
Yep.
from that. And then when you're looking at interpretation services, I don't know, this goes back, I've struggled with this a lot. Like, someone that does not have English as their native language or speak English, they wouldn't even know where to look for this in there to know that. I would like to see us be more proactive for the case manager, especially with an IEP, to say, would you like to ask them proactively, would you like to have an interpreter instead of having the burden shift to the person that's not a native English speaker? Does that make sense?
That is how we work our meetings for specifically special education, but I also know for other meetings as well, so.
It doesn't say that in here, though. So if you would like an interpreter at your child's IEP meeting, please contact your child's case manager. And, you know what I mean? And so it's the burden to me when I read this is on the parent where I feel it should be switched.
And we can clarify that or put in that both happen. So just speaking from my
Right,
experience in special ed, each case manager is aware of who needs interpretation services and proactively schedules those, unless the parent says, no, I'm fine, I don't want that. So we would, they do that on their side, but we can certainly clarify that in the handbook to know
I
that
just think that
that's
would be
not,
just for my
onus is not on
interpretation,
them.
That's my thing.
Yep.
You know. And, you know, just, maybe just add a sentence that the, you know, because
Case
then I also
manager
don't want
will-
the burden shift then to the case manager, thinking the parents don't need an interpreter.
Right.
You know, maybe like an and or, I mean, do you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, you can ask for, or, you know, you have the right, if like, I don't want it to be the full burden on the
No,
parent.
I understand, for sure.
So,
I actually have a question, and I don't know if it's changed, but for the absences, going back to the absences, it used to be standard that after 2 days that you were sick, and let's say you're going on the third day that you're sick. I couldn't remember if it was 2 or 3, but you required a doctor, the student to come back required a doctor's note. And in the handbook, it kind of makes it seem like you're allowed 7 days total, and then you need basically, you know, someone steps in and calls. And then if students are allowed 5 mental days. And then if they do more than that, then, you know, they need a medical note. Is that rule of the 2 consecutive days, more than 2 consecutive days needing a doctor's note old? Because I don't see it in the handbook.
I believe it's 3,
Or
but
2
our
or 3,
nurses
okay.
do work with families to get doctor's notes to put that in the system to medically excuse the absences. So there's parent excusal, and then there's medical excusal, and a medical excusal requires a doctor's note to be excused.
That's the fear, that's the
So if
one
you're,
with
yeah,
3.
if you're
Like
out 3.
For some
If
reason.
you had strep throat and you had to be out for 3 days, we would need that doctor's note to say, yes, strep throat, student needed to be absent from this date to this date, and then the nurse would process that and put that in as a medical absence
So they would
excused.
it would be required to come back.
Mhm.
So I guess it doesn't, and it's probably like.
Not,
you know,
not required to come back, required to have that medically excused.
And I'll jump into,
Okay.
even if an absence is not 2, 3, 4 days long, if a student brings in a medical note, right, it's a documented medical absence, and student brings in that note to attendance, then that does not count against them for the 7 parentally or parent or guardian excused absences. So our attendance offices are constantly reviewing doctor's notes, different excusal notes. There's a chart that outlines documentation that can be provided
Okay.
in which, that would then not cause the absence to be one of the 7. So I anticipate that when our committee gets together next year, that that's going to be a major point of the discussion, right? Like the 7 parent guardian excused absences, what we're requiring documentation for, what we're not requiring documentation for, review of other districts' total number of absences that they allow for as excused absences. So I think that'll be a major point of discussion for the committee that's processing through attendance, language that's within our handbook next year.
Okay. So is that addressed in the handbook right now, the 3 days?
A medical note?
Yeah. And I guess it's, you know, if it is, it just doesn't jump out.
It's on the chart on page 20. So it
I'm
talks
on it,
about a
and I'm like, I don't-
reason for absence and then
Right.
documentation required, and it says yes.
Right.
Again, it's how the absence is then coded, whether it's just a parent calling in and saying, my student's not feeling well today, he's not coming in. Without a medical documentation, that would be considered an apparent excusal.
Yeah, I saw that, but I think it's important that parents understand the 3-day rule for medical.
If it's being,
You know?
and that could just be part of our, honestly, it's not included, the 3-day
Yeah.
span and a note being required is not included right now within our attendance
Okay.
section. We may have evolved away from that, kind of post-COVID, with
Okay.
some updates, but that doesn't mean that our health office, to
Isn't,
Dr.
yeah.
Owen's point, isn't kind of using that 3-day mark to make additional contacts home, to ask if there's a medical situation and make sure that families are submitting that documentation.
Okay.
So it could be more of our internal practice evolved away from something that was formally written within the handbook. But we are accepting notes on a, like, regular basis for those students that are returning, and calls are being made for each absence. If we don't have parent contact or guardian contact initiated, calls are being made by our attendance office. So it's a collaborative effort in getting in contact with families to make sure that we know why kids are absent, what support they might need, and then what documentation we should be receiving, so that absences are coded properly within our system.
Okay, so I mean, it's more lenient, I don't wanna say lenient, but it's more relaxed, like families don't have to worry. It looks like it's shifted ever since maybe the COVID. It's not like before. I felt like any school system, I just remember before COVID, it's like, oh, even across work, like, you're gone more than 3 days, like, you need a doctor's note, like, it was very important, But it seems like it's not the case anymore.
Well, attendance is really important.
No,
We have
I
not-
get it,
Yeah,
but
no,
I don't mean it in a bad way, but yeah.
No, what hasn't shifted is the 7 parent or guardian excused absences. I think that's a point that we need to discuss moving forward, but that's been a consistent number that's been within our handbook. So a new inclusion would be our mental health days. Those count against your 7. That's outlined within that chart.
Right.
So I can't speak to that 3-day timeframe. We may have evolved away from it if it was in prior to 21, 22. But our practice is to make contact with families to make sure that we know why kids are absent, and to follow up accordingly to make sure that they have the support that they need. So, but I think that your point's well taken. I think we need to talk about, right, like all the language that's included within our handbook around attendance. We know how important attendance is, and we need to, problem solve as a committee to think about how we can continue to get better and better with that absenteeism data point.
Yeah.
Because we know kids are gonna do better and have a better, more fulfilling experience if they're here with our teachers, coaches, sponsors, and all of us in our system. So it's really important.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure to clarify, it even with medical notes, it's not so much a return to school note. That was kind of the beginning of COVID, you needed proof to be able to come back. We've never necessarily required that, maybe in specific cases of like an infectious disease situation, but it wasn't that. It was about the excusal of the absences. So that's why after 2 days or 3 days of parental calling in saying my student is sick, in order for those to be excused as medical, you would need the doctor's note. It wasn't the gatekeeper of whether you could come back to school or not, and we still do not use that. Right, yeah. So students are welcome back. It's just in terms of then how that's coded in the system afterward.
But even if it's not enforced, it doesn't really need to be delineated, because I was under that misconception, so you just clarified it.
I think you bring up a good point, like, to your, parents sometimes, like, thinking.
Yeah.
Taking the time to really look and see, like, what's changed, and even being aware of how that is. And I think that, like, I know that Dr. Tyrell, you're doing a good job of reminding parents in a lot of your weekly emails about the importance of attendance.
Yeah.
And I think that helps, send that narrative to the community to keep them kind of abreast of what's going on, because you're right, like, you fall into like, well, that's just how it's always been.
Yes, exactly.
And it's very, so I think the point even here, and even looking at all the conduct and stuff, is like, is there anything that the community from a really like far outside, like, again, you guys are working in it all the time, but is there any big takeaways that are gonna feel like is that gonna feel like a seismic shift to the people in the community? And so just be thinking about that, or being aware of that this is gonna feel different, or this is different. And I don't know if that gets communicated in an orientation way, or if it, again, is something that you guys do pretty well when you try to send out your communications. We tell our students, that kind of thing, but.
I think your point's well taken. Like, the code of conduct is one of those, is like a big thing, right? That we need to make sure that our communication efforts are prioritized, because it is vastly different. The attendance language that you see in this year's handbook has been minimally updated, and really that's to include the language that's in the code of conduct about participation and need for students to be present for 4 periods on days in order to participate. That's the only shift that we have in the attendance section right now. Again, I think we're gonna see, if I had to forecast and fast forward to next year, I think we're gonna see we'll see some additional changes based on how our committee interacts with that language and talks about attendance here at LT moving forward.
I think that's good, though. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it is
good.
good. It's been.
Can I just clarify something here? Kind of piggybacking on what you said there, Dr. Tyrell, about mental health days. Am I correct in understanding that if a doctor's note is provided, then it does not count against. So if I have a student who is clinically depressed and we're having a bad day and I need to take them to see their therapist, or I need to take them to see my therapist, or whatever I need to do as a parent, if I bring in documentation, that's not going to count against their 7, is that correct?
That should be accurate, correct.
Okay, because as I understand that because of how you explained it, but what I'm reading here, I wouldn't understand.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at this, and it's even in bold print, like, mental health absences do count, and there's no caveat to that. So, unless I missed it somewhere else.
No,
So-
you didn't miss
No.
it. So in other words, if a
That would
mental
cause me
absence-
anxiety.
If a mental health absence is accompanied by a doctor's note, then
Yeah.
that doctor's note would take it would be.
It would change the
accounted for
category.
in a bit of a
Yeah.
different way than a parent calling in and saying,
Right.
hey, my child's gonna be taking a mental health absence today, which in
Right.
that case would count as one of the 7. But with a note, so we can probably provide some clarifying language there.
The rationale is that students are not required to have any documentation to take a mental health day. So there's that balance of,
Yeah.
we don't want someone to
so
feel
that-
like they can't because we're saying you need a medical note for it to be excused. You will have an excused mental health day without medical documentation.
Right.
Talk about like,
Right. Yeah,
Complex,
it's
yeah. So we
between
wanna
a rock
make
and a hard
sure,
place,
yep.
right? So as a parent, I could call in the morning, we're taking a mental health day.
Yeah.
And
And it's
in the
excused.
midst of dealing with my child and their situation, I say, yeah, we're calling our therapist and we're gonna go
Yep.
have a session. And that therapist then gives us a note to then bring in the following day when they return to school. Then that can be coded differently, yeah?
for
I
sure.
think the caveat to that, though, is if it's a counselor or a social worker, they wouldn't be included in one of the
In the
5
five,
branches,
right.
right? So I don't know that that would necessarily equate to being a medically excused. If
It
it's
would
a
have to be-
psychiatrist,
Okay,
yeah.
so it has to be a
Psychiatrist.
doctor that
Right, but see, and
practices.
therein lies the difference, because I think the vast number of, I'll say people, not even just high school students, correct me if I'm wrong, if they're having a mental health crisis, they're probably going to be turning to a therapist before they're turning to a
I
psychiatrist.
think it depends.
It could be, but if they don't have some pre-diagnosed reason
Correct.
to even have a psychiatrist, right? Then we're saying, at a time where we know that mental health crisis is through the roof, we're kind of saying, well, only if you have a psychiatrist, but not if you have a therapist. It muddies the waters.
I
And
will-
I just think as a parent who may have, that situation where their numbers start to get pretty high, I suppose you could always say, deal with it on an individual basis, but to look at that and have that anxiety of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do, right?
In practicality, I can tell you how it typically works, and certainly there are situations, I'm sure, that happen across the district that this is not true, but I would say for most, our student support teams include our school nurses, include our assistant principals who have really keen eye on our attendance, both from the medical side, mental health side, and just, routine absences. For most of our students who have a mental health diagnosis and are receiving any kind of treatment, we're pretty involved with the family in terms of those absences. And what often happens is that counselors or therapists are working under some kind of guidance of a psychiatrist or a medical doctor. And how that has worked practically is that the doctor will write the note saying this student may experience intermittent absences due to a diagnosis of depression, anxiety, whatever the case may be. That then our AP office processes, our health office processes, so that we know that when parent calls and says, today's a really rough day and we're
Okay.
not gonna be able to make it, we can then work with them and code those separately and make sure that they certainly feel free to get the support they need from whoever they need and
Right,
not worry
right.
about the attendance policy
Right,
at that
as
moment.
opposed to having
so.
that compound. Thanks for that
Yeah, no.
explanation, that helps a lot.
And again, I think all of this conversation is good in terms of what language do we need to include in the handbook that might clarify that. Certainly, those are nuanced situations that we don't want to further muddy by adding in. And by the way, if this happens, or by the way, if this, but
Right, you
so
end up
that
with an
people know.
800-page handbook.
Yeah. So,
Right.
but so that people know that we do work with families individually, and that students are well taken care of in those situations in terms of an attendance perspective, and also making sure documentation is in order.
I appreciate your clarification,
Of course,
thank you.
of course.
Leslie, I'm sorry, but maybe it's just me. What is homebound? It's been like
Sure.
itching me. I'm like,
We do have some
There's
students.
another term we can put the thing
Yeah.
in.
oh yeah. I'm like, I feel silly asking, but I'm like, I really.
over here.
There is a section, I think, that addresses homebound more specifically, but in brief, there are students who, because of an illness or an injury, are not able to attend at school for a period of time, and so we receive doctor's notes stating that a student needs to be on homebound instruction for the period of their illness. We've had students who have been going through cancer treatment, who have had a really bad, leg break, then they're in traction and can't come to school for a while, and that just then alerts us. We have a whole process through our nurse's office again, and then students receive some instruction through homebound instruction.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, no, that completes the picture.
Yeah. So many
you.
different things and so many
Yeah, I was like,
different
wow.
ways in which our students, are here or are receiving services if they're even not here.
Thank you.
Of course.
Kind of adding to the same discussion, on the bottom of the handbook, page 61, talks about our speak up line. And there's a couple paragraphs at the bottom that says, please note, tips will not be monitored outside of school hours on student non-attendance days, weekends, school breaks, including summer holidays. Tips should be specific, blah, blah, blah. Should we or could we have a statement in there that says something along the lines of, if this is a required need or emergency outside of those school hours, please contact, and then just list resources, 911, suicide prevention hotline, text line, something like that.
I like that.
Yep, we've got 911 in there, but I do know that the state monitors or has some 24-hour lines, so we could add those in.
And maybe just right after that paragraph too, because I know you have it up above, but I feel like it's, like, here's our caveat, we can't get it here, but here's what you can do during that time. And then I promise my last one is on page 42. And this is one of those, like, comparing apples to apples thing. On number 8, it talks about, in all courses, assessments of learning objectives counted as part of their achievement grade can be retaken or revised without penalty. Does that include, this is probably a Scott question, does this include all courses? Because I'm assuming there are some courses like our ACP, maybe some of our dual credit, that we don't allow retakes on?
Correct.
Okay. So should we have that clarified in here?
What page are you
42, number 8. Unless I missed it somewhere else, but I don't remember.
Under
seeing something.
academic grading system, it's
Yeah.
page 46 of the
Sorry,
board.
I'm on the board book, and I'm just looking at the page numbers at the bottom of the.
No worries. And then 42 of the actual handbook.
Yeah.
So we could add the caveat in for
Good point.
ACP.
That's a good idea.
So I've got.
That's good for clarification purposes. 'cause
Yeah.
of course
I would
they
use
don't.
dual credit, not
Dual
ACP.
credit, not ACP.
Right.
Okay.
Anything else?
Anybody else?
Good work.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks for.
Thank you. Thanks for all the questions. It helps continue to clarify and make sure that, our ultimate goal is that this is a user-friendly
Yeah.
resource and not something that just is.
It's really evolved.
Very
And
helpful.
you've been working on it, for a long time, so appreciate it.
And this would go into effect if the board approves at our regular action meeting. It would go into effect. We're putting the date of August 1st, and we usually get these out to our new class as soon as they come in, obviously our other classes as well, but that gives us a little time this summer to, again, we can make some of the edits, make some of the adjustments, things like testing and things that we know that dates are going to change, and then we'd have it ready to go for the class of, gosh, what is it, the class of 2028?
Yeah.
It is 2028.
So do we feel like, because we've talked about a lot of different things on here, that we would get then a revised copy of this with notations?
I think
Yeah.
the changes are doable to make before the 17th, and
Yeah.
then we'd ask the board to consider approving the handbook inclusive
With
of
the
the code of
revisions.
conduct at the June 17th meeting.
That works.
Everybody good with that?
Yep.
Alrighty.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you again for all of your hard work on this.
Thank
It was
you,
a
and again, thanks
lot
to,
of our attorney's involvement in all of this, too. It's
As
a
thanks
lot of
for-
work.
Yes, thanks for
thank
being
you
here.
Coming
both
in.
so
Thanks
much.
for your
Thanks,
time.
John and Peter.
Thanks.
And truly the names and the, I don't want to try to go through them from memory because I'll leave somebody out and feel terrible. But everybody that was on that PTA BIC committee really worked hard and provided a lot of input, so much appreciated.
Very good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we have one item that is human resource related, stipend committee recommendations to Ed Piotrowski.
Thank you very much. We do have 4 recommendations from the stipend committee that we are recommending to the Board of Education for review and approval at the June 17th board meeting. All 4 of these recommendations really stem from expansion or growth of particular programs, initiatives, and in the case of athletics, the expansion of IHSA offerings by way of girls flag football, which has certainly grown in school participation, not only in the West Suburban Conference, but also at the state level, which has caused it to grow. Starting with Older Adult Connections, this is a group that really works with outreach to senior citizens organizations, community organizations that serve populations of older adults. That group has really expanded its offerings, what it's been doing as new retirement communities have come online within the community. They've expanded their outreach as well, and so the committee has reviewed a recommendation and believes it is justified to increase the stipend, which would coincide with just increased meetings and increased events for that group. We do have the recommendation for the increase in stipends for inclusion and mentoring, or induction and mentoring program coordinators. This is a stipend that over time has fluctuated as our program has changed. Initially, we had 2 11% stipends. There were really 2 people that were overseeing the program, and about 7 or 8 years ago, we made the change to have 1 standalone program coordinator and then 2 people that would work ongoing throughout the year, assessment training, differentiation training, SIOP training, to really help support our first and second year certified staff members throughout the year on some of these district initiatives that the rest of their colleagues had been working through or learning about through either institute days or professional learning community days, school improvement days. We want to continue that support on the ongoing basis, but we've moved back into a 2-person model for the induction and mentoring program coordinators. Our 2 program coordinators have really done a lot of work in conjunction with our central leadership team and the things that we've wanted to see incorporated into making the system more robust, providing more support for all of our first and second year staff members, including more opportunities for ongoing support outside of just that induction and mentoring week that is typically that week prior to all certified staff returning for the school year. So we are looking to restore the stipends, not back to that initial 2 at 11%, but 2 at 10%, because we do know we still have those other stipends in place as well too. So the stipend committee reviewed that and is confident in presenting that recommendation. We have a recommendation to create stipends for the growth and creation of 5 equity ambassador leader positions, which is really an outgrowth of the work that Dr. Rowe has been doing with members of the equity ambassador team. Those 5 equity ambassador leaders, we view in a very similar light to those people that I just referred to with the ongoing support of our induction and mentoring program throughout the year. And in fact, we have matched the stipend at 4% stipends because it's similar ongoing work. There are different equity ambassador leaders. Not all 5 would be doing the same. Some would be working with our seed group as a seed facilitator. I know that that's something that Dr. Rowe and Cody Daly got off the ground this year and are looking to grow and expand that for next year. An equity book club facilitator that would work throughout the school year. 2 Celebrate LT facilitators that would work with different groups of students to celebrate just different populations, different heritages throughout the school year. And then a community conversations and affinity group facilitators rounding out the 5. So the stipend committee has reviewed those and is recommending moving forward with that. And then finally, there has been growth at the IHSA level as well as the West Suburban Conference related to girls flag football. We are at this point making a recommendation that we would like to officially recognize flag football as an LT sport with accompanying stipends for that. John Grunke has reviewed the length of season for flag football. It most closely aligns with our boys and girls golf season. So the stipends that he's recommended are the stipends that are essentially for the length of that season, that 10 points, I believe it was 10.72 for 13.65 for the head varsity coach and 10.72 for the head JV coach. As this program begins, we would have those two coaches. We certainly anticipate reviewing this and if we have growth in that program, like we have in multiple other sports that have grown, most recently girls lacrosse, I think, and bowling as they became recognized IHSA sports. We certainly anticipate coming back to the Board of Education with some recommendations for additional positions if and when we get to that point of student participation. But we are excited about this. There are currently 8 teams in West Suburban Conference that have flag football. We would be the 9th, and there are 4 that are also going through a similar process that we are right now. So that would be 13 teams in the West Suburban Conference alone. John is confident that we would have conference play as well as IHSA State Series play, not next year, but very soon. I'm happy to answer any questions that the Board of Education may have.
I've got a few. For the first one, Ed, the older adult connections.
Yes.
Do we know how often, I think that's fantastic, by the way. Do we know how often they meet and how many outings, I mean, just roughly, that
Typically-
they do with the community?
Sure. Typically, a 2.64% stipend is meeting every other week, so that
Okay.
5.28 would have that expectation. It would be on average once a week. That might not be the case throughout the entire year. There may be some times where they're meeting a little bit more frequently to plan for outings, and then sometimes a little more infrequently, maybe on the tail end of things. Peter, I don't know if you had a little bit more information about that.
Yeah, that's about right as far as how often they meet, but then also the additional time with their outings, because the outings typically run 3 or 4 hours
Right.
at the senior communities, depending on what the activity actually is. So there's additional supervision outside of the actual weekly.
I love that so
Yeah.
much.
And in the contract, it talks about for these student-facing groups, it's essentially a 1% stipend for every 14.4 hours of student contact, right? Now, sometimes that's involved in the planning as well, too, but that typically governs that, covers that like 1 meeting a week for a 5.28% stipend or something along those lines.
Okay. And then the only other one I had, I'm super excited and curious about the flag football for here at LT, because I think that's just awesome. And I'm curious if we've done any sort of, if we've done an interest survey to see how many students are interested in participating here at LT?
John, do you know that?
I mean, did they
Yeah,
try
we're
anything
kind of-
last year?
We're kind of waiting until we had the conversation at the board level, but there was a survey that we distributed, just put it on our display boards, and kids were able to hit the QR code and find out more information about it. We've got more than 50 girls just in the rising
Yes.
sophomore, junior, and senior class. So
Okay.
we're gonna have more than that. That was just in the last couple of weeks.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
we're
you.
very excited about it.
Those are my questions. Both really, I mean, all 4 of them are great, but those 2 in particular, yeah, very cool. Where will they play? Will they play out?
They'll practice on site somewhere, so probably in Bennett Field. All the games, I think varsity games will be played on Bennett Field. Flag football's a little bit different, where you can play multiple games going across the field. It doesn't use the entire field, like 11-on-11 football does. So that's the aim, is to get them in the stadium as much as we possibly can.
Super. All right.
And is that like no cut too? We just pretty much will.
We're gonna list it as a limited sport.
Okay.
Just because that kind of gives us the flexibility with
Okay.
only 2 coaches. We can't have 180 girls somehow.
Right.
But we might be back here saying, hey, we need some more coaches.
Good
Wildly
problem to have.
popular,
Right.
yeah.
Not
Okay.
a bad
So we would
problem
love
to
to
have.
keep as many, especially in this first.
Sure,
We would
yeah.
love to keep as many girls out on the team as we possibly
Cool.
can.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah. Let's go.
Other comments, questions?
I will only add that I'm really actually looking forward to all of the work and the Equity Ambassador Leaders expanding as well, because there is a lot of opportunity there, and it really shows some attention that we're able to provide to reach out to different people like within the community. So I think it's really great. All of this looks really good, and that even feeds into the older adult connections as well. So,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
There'll be a lot of this embedded in our strategic plan, so it's very exciting to see.
Thank you.
So we'll put this on our next board agenda for action for approval time.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Then at this time is our second opportunity for audience members to give comments or feedback to the Board of Education. We do not have anyone signed up. So this concludes our business for this evening. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Our meeting is adjourned at 7:40. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Is that a record?
Have a good night.
Good night.
Close, close. We've had a few there.
That was your first?
Nice work, Tim. Thanks.
Yeah. Very nice.
Thank
Tim.
you.
Everybody.
Wait, Jen, do you have a second?
Sure. Hold on one second, I have somebody's